Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Miles Verschuur, and with 2 feet firmly planted on Aboriginal land, would like to begin this historic occasion by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country we are gathered on this evening, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. The art of leadership always was and always will be practised on this country, and we pay respects to Wurundjeri elders past and present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us this evening. On behalf of the Newman College Students Club, I'd like to welcome you all to the 39th Archbishop Daniel Mannix Memorial Lecture, making its much anticipated return after more than 3 years. We are in for an enlightening evening. The lecture series was initiated in 1977 at the behest of 3 Newman College students in order to honour Archbishop Mannix's contribution to our college, the Catholic Church and the broader Australian nation. In doing so, the lecture seeks to explore, understand and conceptualise leadership in contemporary Australia. Through hearing from distinguished leaders from all walks of Australian life, we hope that Newman students, the broader university community and beyond can be inspired to lead positive change for all. Across its history, we have been fortunate to hear from a diverse range of leaders. We have heard from Prime Ministers, Governors-General, judges, doctors and academics. From mavericks like B.A. Santamaria, Joe Bajolki-Pedersen and Peter Garrett, to deep thinkers such as Manning Clark, Barry Jones and Tim Costello, this lecture series continues to show how leadership can encompass many unique ideas, temperaments and accomplishments. With us this evening is the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull AC. From humble beginnings in Sydney, Mr Turnbull was educated at Sydney Grammar School before receiving a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Sydney. A Rhodes Scholar, he obtained a Bachelor of Civil Laws at Brasenose College, Oxford. Whilst in the United Kingdom, he married his wife Lucy, who also joins us here this evening.
Hooray, hooray for Lucy.
Mr Turnbull embarked upon a remarkable professional career in journalism, law, banking, finance and advocacy. Particular highlights included acting for former MI5 agent Peter Wright in the famous Spycatcher trial against the Thatcher government. At the end of the trial, Mr Turnbull concluded the outcome, quote, confirms that Australian democracy is founded on sceptical good sense. Armed with that assurance, Mr Turnbull chaired the Australian Republic movement before moving into frontline politics in 2004, being elected to the division of Wentworth in the Australian House of Representatives. He served variously as Minister for the Environment, Minister for Communications and Leader of the Opposition before serving as Australia's 29th Prime Minister from 2015 to 2018. In office, the Turnbull government legislated for same-sex marriage, continued the implementation of the National Broadband Network, commenced the Snowy Hydro 2.0 project and the Western Sydney Airport, and was a strong advocate for Australia on the world stage. This evening, Mr Turnbull will be addressing the topic, Defending Australia's Democracy in a Might is Right World. In the current geopolitical morass which the world finds itself, xenophobia, nationalism and belligerence on the rise, what better time to hear from a former Australian Prime Minister on how our nation can navigate the emerging discordant new world order. Would everyone please join me in welcoming the 29th Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Miles. Lucy and I are really so honoured that you've invited us here and recklessly invited me to speak to you. So thank you. Thank you very much. And Miles, thank you also for your very gracious and just acknowledgement of country too. My friends, we are living in a very different world to the one we were a decade ago. And it's not just the technological changes that we see around us that operate at an accelerating pace. But we are today living in an overtly might is right world. Now, you might say, if you're a little bit cynical, and you're entitled to be cynical, particularly about political matters, that might has always tended to be right, if not just. It's always been able to prevail. But the post-Second World War order that democracies like Australia participated in establishing, including, of course, the United Nations and embodied in the United Nations Charter, was founded on the principle that might was not right. The United Nations Charter sets out that the rights of all nations are to be the same. Large nations, small nations, middle-sized nations. That respect for all countries, autonomy, sovereignty, is fundamental. And why was that? Because the global community had learnt the lesson of 2 terrible world wars and seen what happens when the rights of smaller countries can be trampled over. And you know, the founder of Newman College and the Archbishop in whose honour this lecture series is given, Daniel Mannix, understood very keenly the rights of small countries, and in particular his own Ireland. And he, firstly as the coadjutor archbishop, the deputy archbishop if you like, and then as the archbishop, campaigned in Melbourne against not only the Prime Minister of the day, Billy Hughes, William Morris Hughes, not only against the Government of Australia, not only against almost unanimous opinion, the big end of town, a big end of every town, but against the British Empire itself. And he made the case for an independent Ireland, he made the case for an independent Australia, and he made the case for freedom. And he said, more than 100 years ago, why should Australians be conscripted to fight in a war for freedom when they are being denied the freedom in their own country? Why, he said, should we be dragged into a war to ensure that Germany cannot occupy Belgium when Britain has no more right to occupy Ireland? Now, this sounds bold stuff today, but can you imagine the courage that it took to make that case a century ago? Extraordinary. And not just the courage of Daniel Mannix. I mean, he was, I didn't ever know him, but, you know, he was, Father Bill. Where is Father Bill? Is he here? He knew him, remembers him? But there's a few of you that may have known Daniel Mannix, but he was a solitary, austere figure. But he could not have made that case and that campaign if he had not had the courageous support of his flock, of his people, of the Catholics of Melbourne, or at least a majority of them, a substantial number of them. He couldn't have done that. He couldn't have had those huge parades, those gigantic public meetings with tens of thousands of people present to hear him speak, the huge St Patrick's Day parades. He couldn't have done that. So there was courage in the bishop, but there was courage in the people as well. And nowadays, my friends, we are being called on to show that kind of courage. Courage for independence, belief in ourselves, a determination to be resilient and to be self-reliant. Now, I said at the outset that we're living in a might is right world, and I talked about the post-Second World War order. The leader of that order was the United States of America. We used to talk about the President of the United States as the leader of the free world. And American presidents, and you can say whether they got it right or got it wrong, you can question whether they were being somewhat hypocritical or somewhat self-interested or had mixed motives, but at least they would always make the case that they were taking actions in international affairs, including military actions, in order to defend and uphold democracy. Right or wrong, often misconceived, often counterproductive. But nonetheless, that was their goal. President Trump, and he's often accused of lying, but in this respect he is very honest, he does not pretend to be interested in those values whatsoever. He not only believes might is right, he says he believes it. He practices it. He posts on his social media site, my golden rule is he who has the most gold makes the rules. And he exerts power relentlessly in order to achieve his goals and America's goals. The slogan of his movement is America First. And that means America will be advantaged at the expense, if necessary, at the expense of others. The whole global tariff campaign is not a win-win, and often when people say this is a win-win deal, they really mean they're going to win a bit more than you, but nonetheless, he doesn't even pretend that it's a win-win. It is about America first, America as the most powerful country, as he regularly reminds us, the most powerful military, and he uses that power to advantage the United States. Now, what that means, and we have to be clear-eyed about this, is that Donald Trump's view of power and the responsibility that power brings is not very different to that of Vladimir Putin. I'm not suggesting that they are to be compared as people, as, not suggesting Donald Trump is planning to invade a country. In fact, he's actually quite the opposite of a warmonger. I know that. I've talked to him about it at length, and you can see that from his own statements and actions. But he believes that strength is what matters, power is what matters. Now, this is a very, very different world. I'd give you an example of how much the world has changed. Go back to 2017. That's the last, I was still Prime Minister at that point, that we published a foreign affairs white paper. We haven't published one since. Probably about time Penny Wong got her department to do another one. But in that, that's no criticism. I'm trying to be very objective, and perhaps, Daniel Mannix is very good at criticism. I must say, he had a sort of almost Keating-esque, ability to sledge people. I particularly like that way he used to get into Billy Hughes. I'm digressing now, but I'm an admirer of rhetoric, particularly of the more deadly kind. And he talked about Billy Hughes having been to England and hanging around with duchesses and having spent time with the monarchy, and he said that spending a weekend at Windsor doesn't make you a gentleman. Quite cutting. Anyway, getting back to Trump and what we're facing now. So we've got a president whose view of the world, as I say, has got more in common with Putin than it does with any single one of his predecessors in modern times. And so we are now in a situation where we no longer can say that our values are aligned with the United States in the way they had been for many decades. The 2017 Foreign Affairs White Paper listed 5 objectives of our foreign policy. I won't go through them all. They're not the most eloquent document in the world, but essentially they were all about respecting the rights of smaller nations, defending the rule of law, international rule of law, opposing protectionism, opposing terrorism, keeping Australia safe from terrorism, and supporting development in the Pacific. Now, of those 5 areas, if you like, the only one that you could unequivocally say, I would hope, that the United States is absolutely committed to is keeping us all safe, and their country safe and our country safe from terrorism. It's hard to say America's committed to development in the Pacific after it's abolished USAID, and certainly an administration whose leader says tariff is the most beautiful word hardly believes in free trade. I mean, protectionism is what they're all about. So how does Australia deal with that? Well, the reality is we have to deal with the America we've got. We have to deal with the administration we've got. When we have a stake in the United States political determinations, but we do not have a vote. And so we have to get back to focusing on ourselves and, if you like, talking about putting our nation first and our interests first. And that means we have to make sure that we are independent, that we are not dependent on others, particularly on the United States. We have to become more self-reliant. Now, this, by the way, some people would say, depending on what media outlet you read, would say that talking like that sounds anti-American. It's not. In fact, J.D. Vance, potentially Mr. Trump's successor, recently praised at length General Charles de Gaulle, who as President of France, took France out of the NATO integrated command and insisted that France retain total sovereignty over its own nuclear forces. And he said de Gaulle was right, not a view that Presidents Kennedy or Johnson shared at the time. But so for Australia to be more independent, more self-reliant, is not being anti-anybody or, opposing any country, let alone the United States. It is ensuring that we are best able to manage our own affairs in the world. So what does that mean? Well, that means firstly that we must have complete sovereignty over our own military capabilities. Now, you've probably heard me criticise the AUKUS deal. I'm happy to go, I can bore for the world on submarines if you're interested, but I'm not going to do that now. I'm happy to take some questions later. But the bottom line is this, that we should ensure that every single one of our military capabilities is sovereign, that is to say it is able to be directed, deployed at the direction of the Australian government without the concurrence or consent of any other party. And you cannot say that about this nuclear submarine program that we are apparently going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on. The second thing we've got to do is we have to work with other countries that are like-minded. We have to recognise that for a smaller nation like Australia, we've got to find our security not solely in an alliance with the United States, but in working with our neighbours, particularly in the region. We've got to look at our security less as a series of spokes going into hubs in Washington or even Beijing, but rather as a mesh, working with our neighbours. There's a very good example of that. I can give you a good example of how that can be done and how that was done. You may remember there was a big, very ambitious trade deal in the Asia-Pacific region called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And Donald Trump, when he got into office in 2017, he pulled the United States out of it. And at the time, most people thought that the deal was dead. It involved 12 countries, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, a whole host of Malaysia, a whole host of nations around the Pacific, rim of the Pacific. And everyone thought the deal was dead. And actually, John Key and I, then the Prime Minister of New Zealand, concluded towards the end of 2016, we thought Trump would do this. And we thought, well, maybe we should try to keep the deal alive, regardless of the Americans pulling out. And we did. In fact, it was great testimony to Lucy and I as joint advocates. You mentioned the Spycatcher trial earlier. We did that case together. We've done a lot of joint advocacy over the years. And we did a very good job in January 2017 together, persuading Shinzo Abe, then the Prime Minister of Japan, that we should stay with the deal, keep it going, even though the Americans had pulled out. And Abe was initially very concerned that this would offend Trump. And we kept on saying, look, Shinzo, out of the room, out of the deal, they pulled out, they can't complain. We've got to keep going. And we did. And it was, had a few ups and downs and hiccups and so forth and dramas. But we got there. We ended up, the Trans-Pacific Partnership survived. It gained two meaningless adjectives, comprehensive and progressive, which is why it's now known as the CPTPP. And we lost one member. But, of course, we've now gained the United Kingdom. This is the single most ambitious modern trade deal, and it was done just as the window of doing free trade deals was coming down, just as the new era of protectionism was arriving. So we slid through a window that was just about to close. But that was an example of countries that had been going along with American leadership on a project, waking up and saying, we don't need American leadership here. We can do this ourselves. We can take our destiny into our own hands. And this sort of sovereign autonomy is what we have to do more of. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, spoke about this earlier in the year at the Shangri-La Dialogue Conference in Singapore, and he talked about the CPTPP as an example of this, and talked about how the European Union should aim to work closely with the TPP. In other words, those nations that still believe in free trade, those nations that do not believe they have a right or an obligation, if you like, to effectively impose tariffs on the rest of the world as a price of doing business with them, as Donald Trump does. Those of us who still believe in free trade and the rule of law and open markets should work together. And that is why diplomacy is so important, and why it's so important for us to be seen as an independent actor. Now, I can tell you from my own experience in public life, and particularly as Prime Minister, the more Australia is seen as an echo of the United States or anyone else, the more we are seen as a rubber stamp for Washington, the less credibility and the less influence we have. One foreign minister in our region said to me on this very topic, he said, the more you sound like you're echoing Washington, the less notice anyone takes and the less motive we have to talk to you, because we may as well just ring head office direct. So that's real. So a strong independent Australia, a strong sovereign Australia is absolutely critical. Diversifying our trade, whether it is from China or the United States or whatever, making sure that we are independent. And that focus on our own sovereignty, not relying on, a big brother, is absolutely vital for us to cope with this might is right world. So let me move now to the domestic sphere, because might is right is linked to this move, this sort of rejection of democracy, this rise of what people talk about authoritarian populism. Some people talk about, say it's proto-fascist or fascist, talk about these parties, whether it is in the United States or individuals in the United States or in Europe, who are defying the law, attacking judges, using the legal system to attack their opponents, and seeking to coerce the media to their point of view. I mean, it is remarkable that the least democratic country in the European Union, Hungary, which has a Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who still has elections, but he has done everything he possibly can do to stop the opposition from winning. So it is, and he proudly says this is an illiberal democracy. He is seen as a poster child, if you like, a hero. A lot of people who now claim to have this, what they call conservative, but really is a form of authoritarianism. Now, this is terribly dangerous. I mean, we've all seen this film before, sadly, many times. How do we avoid that happening in this country? We've got a couple of things going for us in Australia which we should be very proud of but never complacent about. Firstly, we have compulsory voting. We've had that for 100 years, more than 100 years in fact. And we enforce it. The Electoral Commission estimates that about 98% of all of the people in Australia who are eligible to vote are actually on the electoral roll, and that at an election generally 91, 92, 93%, depending on the election, will vote, and it varies from electorate to electorate. Very, very high participation rate. Miles mentioned legalising same-sex marriage. You may remember, some of you, that there was a postal ballot before that where we consulted the Australian people. That was completely voluntary. 80% of Australians participated. Well over 60% voted yes, which is why it became law. But Australians, in other words, not only are forced to vote, but we're happy to vote. Maybe it's the sausage sizzle. The second thing we've got going for us is preferential voting. That, together with compulsory voting, pushes our politics to the centre. So we are politically a less polarised society than many other countries, particularly the United States. Thirdly, we have an independent electoral commission which determines the boundaries, so we don't have rigged boundaries. Now, if you compare us with the United States, you have the boundaries are mostly determined by politicians, so most congressional districts can only be won by one party or another. So if you're in a district that can only be won by the Republican Party, the only contest that matters is the Republican primary, in which the Republican enthusiasts, the rusted-on members, are the only ones that vote. And so naturally, that encourages candidates to swing off to the right, and similar conclusions for the gerrymandered Democrat seats. And of course, they don't have compulsory voting, and they have first past the post, so they don't have preferential voting. So that makes their politics more polarised. So in other words, institutions really matter, but we've got to constantly focus on defending our parliamentary system and our electoral system and ensuring that it continues to deliver outcomes that bring people to the centre. I mean, the object of parliaments, the object of politics should be to get people together to resolve things at the centre and compromise and listen to the other party and cut a deal. That's what it's all about. That's what politics should be all about, rather than winner takes all. The other thing that we have, which I think is very much under siege, is we still have a shared public square in Australia. I think the ABC plays a very big role in this as a public broadcaster. But I think we are still, by and large, share the same facts. That is not true in many other countries. It's certainly not true in the United States, where people are living in their own tribal echo chambers, getting media that basically panders to them, whether it's social media or indeed curated media like cable TV news channels, which are basically telling them what they want to hear. That is really dangerous, because then, once again, people are polarised and they're not able to come together in the centre. We really have to do everything we can to ensure that we preserve a respectful public square where competing forces can debate and resolve issues in a rational fashion. I know that sounds strange for a politician to be saying, or a former politician to be saying, but it is absolutely critical. We can see what's going wrong in other places. So we've got those good assets there, but we can't be complacent about it. So that's why all of the focus on social media, ensuring that you have protections from abuse of social media. In fact, when I was Communications Minister, I set up what was initially the Children's E-Safety Commissioner, now the E-Safety Commissioner. We are dealing with rapidly changing media environment, and so the regulatory responses are going to change, and some of the measures will work, some of them won't. But it is absolutely critical to make sure that we do everything we can to avoid that type of tribal echo chamber situation that you see in other countries, and in particular in the US. So whether we're dealing externally or whether we're dealing with our own domestic affairs, we have got to be able to strengthen our democracy. And we do that by being independent, by being self-reliant, by having a diversity of allies and friends and relationships, making sure that we are not beholden to just one nation, whether it's the United States or anyone else. And internally, we do that by investing in and respecting our democracy and the importance of respectful, well-informed debate. And we have to call people out who tell lies. We've got to do that. What has happened, and I mean, Trump has been a master of this. He's a master of distraction. He'll say one thing that's outrageous, and when people say, hang on, that's not right, he said something else and moved on to another one. And he's frankly not being held to account in the United States. We cannot allow that to develop here. You look at Anthony Albanese or Susan Lee and you say, well, I don't think they're going to turn into a Donald Trump, but who knows? Nobody thought Donald Trump would be president either. So we've got to make sure that our system remains one that is grounded in respect. Let me finally say something about the rule of law. I imagine there's a few lawyers here tonight. Lucy and I I think we probably still are lawyers, Luce, but don't retain us to represent you. You'll get life imprisonment for double parking. Got a bit rusty. We were pretty good in our youth. But, you know, a democracy is not just majority wins. I mean, if you look at the great sweep of history, philosophers, playwrights, look at Coriolanus, Shakespeare's play. Shakespeare himself, pretty sceptical about democracy, because to them it seemed like mob rule. You know, just because the majority of the people want to do something doesn't mean it's right or fair, and it doesn't mean that the people, the minority, are being protected. So what the rule of law does is it empowers the majority at the same time as it constrains the majority. That and the rule of law is what makes a democracy work. And that is under siege in so many places, internationally. Again, you look at the economic coercion you see from China and the United States. I mean, and they're, you know, each of them accuses the others of using economic coercion. They both do it, frankly. And they're both practicing might is right. You know, China puts tariffs on barriers to our exports because they don't like what Scott Morrison said about the spread of COVID. Donald Trump puts massive tariffs on Brazil because he doesn't like that his friend Jair Bolsonaro is on trial and sent to prison. It's a long list. It's literally a very, very long list of what is going on. And look at us, look at our situation. We have these tariffs imposed on us. Trump said to Albanese, oh, don't worry, they're low tariffs, and they are compared to other countries, but they're all completely in breach of the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. You know, what about the tariffs that are being imposed on Canada? The threats to make Canada the 51st state? They're in breach of a free trade agreement Trump signed himself in 2019. So international law is not being respected, but also you see it under siege. You see in the United States judges being attacked, threatened, bullied. You even see that now in the United Kingdom. Some of the things that are being said by Farage and Robert Jenrick in particular about judges in the UK. So the rule of law, defending the rule of law internationally is obviously in our interest. I mean, we're a medium-sized country. You know, we are not a superpower. So might is right absolutely does not work for us. And domestically, the rule of law is just as important, but there we obviously have much greater agency. So, you know, when people have this, you know, whatever it takes approach, you know, the law is irrelevant, get out of the way, that is not the way to go. A sensible, liberal, centrist recognises that you've got to be able to negotiate, you've got to be able to respect people, and ultimately you've got to be able to respect the decisions of the courts. So the times that we're living in call on us to have courage. Not just courage for leaders like Daniel Mannix, but courage for all of us. There's no point sitting back and being complacent. There's no point sitting back and saying, well, it's not affecting me. This out-group, this, you know, a smaller group of people with different political views or different ethnicity, I don't have to worry about them. All of us require the defence of the rule of law, but none of us will get it in the long term unless we are committed to democracy, the rule of law for all of us. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions. Good. Yeah, sure. Where would you like me to sit? Here? Yeah, okay.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Dylan Forge. I'm a third-year Bachelor of Laws student at ACU and a third-year student, a JCR resident at Newman College. It's been an immense privilege to organise this over the last 9 months and to welcome Malcolm and Lucy to Newman. What we've done is we've organised some questions from Newman students. I'll ask them to Malcolm over the next 20 minutes, and we'll see some great enlightenment about how we can take our careers into the future and lead in the workforce that we plan to do in the next few years. But Malcolm, I just wanted to start by saying you've had such a diverse career, many of us students would aspire to have. That's from journalism to law, business and eventually politics. What originally inspired you to enter public life, and was there a particular moment that pushed you towards politics?
Well, I could offer the streaker's defence. You know, that guy that runs across the MCG with no gear on, and he's hauled up before the magistrate the next morning. The beak says, "Why did you do that?" And he says, "It seemed like a good idea at the time." No, I was inspired to enter public life out of a genuine sense of public service. It's very important to me, very important to Lucy. Both of us have done, spent much of our life in the private sector, but also a fair bit in public service, one form or another. Lucy was the Lord Mayor of Sydney, as you know, and a Deputy Mayor and Chair of the Greater Sydney Planning Commission. We believe it's important, you know, and I think that's it. I mean, it's corny. It's a corny explanation, but that's the motivation.
No, that's good. I think that's something lots of us students as well have a calling to. Moving into a topic that many would be anticipating, we just want to get your general impressions on the recent meeting between Albanese and Donald Trump. What were your thoughts, and what do you think it signals for Australia and US relations moving forward?
Well, look, I thought it was a good meeting. As I said in a little piece I wrote for the Fairfax papers, I thought I gave Albanese 10 out of 10. Look, his main goal was to get in and out without a mishap. And I know the feeling, you know, you think, oh my God, I've got to see this guy. I just want to get in there without being berated or some craziness going on. So tick that box. And that was the most important thing. I thought Trump lavished praise on Albanese. Albanese lavished back, but without being sycophantic. That was really important. Trump, everyone says, oh, you know, you've got to suck up to Trump and flatter him and so forth. That is absolutely the wrong way to go. Of course, you know, go through the usual sort of social flattery, if you like, but being polite. But Trump is a big, blustering bully. I mean, that's like saying the Pope's a Catholic. So there is no great insight there. And the one thing you know about bullies is that the minute you give in to them, you only get more bullying. So my experience with Trump was very instructive for me, and I've written about it because I hoped it'd be instructive to others. And first, you know, major encounter we had this blazing row because he didn't want to honour a deal we being the Australian government, had done with the American government over resettlement of refugees. And my position was, we have an agreement with you, your country, you don't like it, but you've got to honour it. You know, and at one point Trump said, well, you know, you're a businessman, you must have reneged on deals in the past. I said, no, my reputation is I'm a man of my word. I expect you to be the same. I said, look, say what you like about Obama. You know, it's like a new CEO. You inherit a bad contract your predecessor made, criticise your predecessor, take a huge write down, bigger the better in my experience, and move on. But you've got to honour it. And anyway, that was a huge row. Trump was very unhappy, but he did honour it. And by that won his respect, and we had a very constructive relationship about it. And to be honest, a few months later, when we got together, this terrible row that had, you know, people losing their minds on both sides of the Pacific in each government about it, he was joking about it. In fact, he was joking with Lucy and me and Melania. You know, it was like really, it's the only way to deal with bullies. So I thought Albo didn't get into an the circumstances were better, they were harmonious, but he didn't fall into the sucking up trap. The rare earths deal is good. I mean, to be honest, I entered in, we had a similar arrangement or agreement to develop rare earths and rare earth processing in Australia in 2018, and nothing much came of it. So again, you know, I think the circumstances are better now, and I think there is much more likelihood that that will be real. So I think that's good. Big tick. Kevin, you know, Donald doesn't like Kevin. Well, so, I mean, Kevin doesn't like Donald. Well, lots of people don't like Kevin, lots of people don't like Donald. So, you know, I mean, you know, Kevin and I have had a sort of a, you know, a kind of up and down relationship. We're either sort of, you know, mournfully consoling ourselves about being fellow pariahs in our respective political parties, or we're trying to strangle each other on the floor of the House of Representatives or somewhere else. But I thought Rudd did a very good job, and I thought Trump's criticism of him was clearly, you know, tongue-in-cheek, good-humoured. I mean, that was not a Trump rant. And I thought the calls for Rudd to step down were really stupid, and I think have been proved to be that. So, as I say, I give Albo 10 out of 10, but, you know, the best thing he did was get in and out and, as quick as he could, get on the plane back to Australia.
Great. I'm sure that opinion piece, many people in this room have read it, and it's actually the topic of our next question. It's submitted by Grace Rule, a third-year Bachelor of Arts International Politics major at the University of Melbourne. She quotes you in your opinion piece saying, "The agreement on rare earths development and processing is a very good step forward. Australia has pressed for this for a long time." She asks, do you think this agreement hinders the climate change targets Australia should be striving to reach? And does it hinder the relations of Australia on the international stage?
No, I would say no and no. I don't think it hinders. I mean, let me deal with the second one first. I mean, there have been some people saying, oh, this will offend China. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, are we offended by China developing iron ore projects in West Africa? Come on. I mean, I'm sure Rio and BHP would love, and Twiggy would love, and Gina would love the Chinese to stop buying iron ore from Brazil and just only pay it from Australia, pay top dollar. But the Chinese are not, you know, idiots. I mean, they're smart. They want to diversify their sources of supply, of course. And it is crazy that China has got this big dominance in the processing of rare earths. Rare earths, as I'm sure all the chemists and metallurgists here know very well, are not rare at all, actually. There's lots of them. We have lots of them. The real issue is the processing, which is expensive and messy and so forth, and that's basically what China dominates. And they were allowed to dominate that because other countries dropped out. And the penny has finally dropped that these are strategic minerals, that's the better term for them, and that, you know, we've got to make sure that we have diversity of supply. But having said that, this is going to take time. You know, this is not going to be like that. You know, Donald Trump, I heard him say everything will be fine next year. Sorry, that's like saying we've got lots of submarines. That's not true either. You know, well, it depends what you mean by lots. They're very short of them. So will it affect climate goals? No, I think quite the contrary. I think it'll enhance them because, you know, virtually all of the technology, whether it's wind turbines, solar panels, you know, turbines for hydro plants of the kind, you know, we've been involved with, they all require these metals and alloys and, you know, permanent magnets. I mean, how can you have a hydro turbine without a lot of magnets? So, you know, I think it's just, this is a great thing to do. The tragedy is we should have been doing it 10 years ago, if not 20 years ago. But you can't live your life backwards.
Thank you. To move on just generally to your career a bit more, before politics, you're involved in major legal cases and business ventures. Mm-hmm. Looking back, is there one achievement outside politics that you're particularly proud of?
Being married to Lucy and persuading her to stay married to me for more than 45 years, and our family. That has always been the most important thing in our lives and our most important achievement. But you know, that requires a lot of love and a lot of good fortune.
That's great, thank you. This next question comes from Maya Dooley Heath,
No?
a second-year Bachelor of Arts International Relations major at the University of Melbourne. She asks you, if politics is the art of the possible and requires compromise,
Yeah.
what policy goals did you have to give up to become and remain the Liberal Party leader?
Well, I mean, I was constantly compromising on energy policy was really the major one. I mean, that was just a nightmare. And, you know, it's still going on. You know, there's still this... The problem is that you've got, on one side, you've got people who look at, as I used to say at the time, some of you might have heard me say it, who look at energy policy as being about engineering and economics. And then you've got other people who think it's about ideology and idiocy. And it is that is the single most difficult area, and because it was been turned into a culture war issue, and you see this again in the US, we cannot go down that route. How crazy is it that you have got an American administration that has set its face against not just zero emission forms of generating electricity, particularly solar and wind, but those are cheaper than burning fossil fuels. So even if you believe that global warming is garbage and, you know, or climate change is crap, as Tony Abbott once said, even if you believe all of that, the cheapest form of new generation today are renewables plus storage, pretty much anywhere in the world. And so you've got China, you talk about global competition, China is leading the world in those technologies with the benefit of a lot of technology from Australia, by the way, particularly, you know, the work from Martin Green's, team and his, dozens and dozens of graduates from the University of New South Wales, but huge amount of contribution from Australia in that. But China is leading the world in, solar, batteries, wind, electrolyzers, and the US has said, oh no, we're going to stick with fossil fuels. I mean, it is genuinely wild, and that's where ideology and idiocy take you.
To move on to exactly that topic, climate change and energy reform were defining issues of your leadership. How do you view the debate now as climate policy becomes even more urgent? And do you think Australia is moving fast enough on renewable energies?
Well, no, we're not moving fast enough, but thankfully we're not. There isn't, the government. It isn't a problem for the Labor Party internally, right? And the Liberal Party in the Nats are so beleaguered and diminished that I'm not saying it doesn't matter what they're talking about, but it is, as Christopher Pyne used to say, the worst day in government is better than the best day in opposition. It's a miserable business. That's why you've got to cut Susan Lee slack for, saying something crazy. I mean, it is terrible. If you're the opposition leader, some of you may become opposition leader one day. Honestly, God bless you, it's a terrible business. You have to get up every morning and say something negative to the point where one of my friends who was opposition leader in another jurisdiction, another state, he said he was listening to the radio one morning and he's just half listening, and he thought, who is that whinging, miserable guy? Oh, God, what a it's me. So, you've got to... I think so the government's at least on the right page. The critical thing we've got to do now is attack permitting. It takes far too long to get renewables projects approved. We've also got big issues with construction costs in Australia, but that applies to all. You guys know all about that in Victoria. We feel like, for example, if we are not able, if utterly uncompetitive, world's worst construction costs make it too hard to build enough pumped hydro, and I'm not talking about Snowy 2, I mean that's 2/3 built, that will be finished. But But if we can't build enough pumped hydro, all that we'll end up doing is importing more and more batteries from China. So the reality is if we don't get better at building long duration storage in our own country, we will just end up importing more and more plug and play batteries from overseas. And I don't think that's a good outcome. I think you've got all in favour of batteries, but we've got to have a combination. So I think the big challenge with renewables, to be honest, is just getting on with the job, and the big problem is construction costs for some classes of renewables, but for all of them, permitting.
Great. Our next question, moving away from energy reform to technology, comes from Patrick Kelly, a second-year Bachelor of Arts Political Science major from the University of Melbourne. He asks you, you've long championed innovation in the digital economy. In your view, what's the biggest opportunity and perhaps the biggest risk that Australia faces in this new AI era?
Well, it's all becoming redundant, I guess. You do wonder, what happens when the robot says, do I need these humans anymore? Yes. No, I think I think we're in a brave new world with AI. I think there are very big risks. I'm very much an optimist. I don't know what where the biggest opportunity is, but I think clearly the big productivity gains are going to be using artificial intelligence, for sure, absolutely. We're involved. Luce and I have been sort of serial venture capitalists and we've started a lot of businesses, invest early stages of a lot of businesses. So we have a fair exposure to that sector. But, there are a lot of people that are much, much smarter than me, who are far more quantitative than me and know a lot more about programming than me, which is not to say much because I don't know a lot, who are very concerned about, this issue of how do we stay in control of AI because we don't really understand how these programs work. We don't really understand how they're developing, how these large language models are actually learning and developing and providing the responses that they are. So I think that is a risk, and it's, again, it's important for people to be very alert to it and not allow, the urgency, the desperation to be ahead to prevent us from being careful enough to ensure that these new technologies are well understood. And I mean, AI is, let me put that to one side. Let me talk about something that's probably more understandable, certainly for me, social media. When it first burst onto the scene, everyone was so optimistic. They thought this was going to bring democracy to the whole world. This was, Facebook and Twitter were going to bring down dictatorships all around the world. It was going to give everybody a voice. You wouldn't need to have an editor or a producer to, approve you're getting onto a television station or a radio network or into a newspaper. And that was fantastic. And so, we're drowning in lies. In a lot of places, a lot of people are no longer sharing the same facts. And we're living in those echo chambers I was talking about earlier. That this, we can see how dangerous this is, and we didn't understand that. No, I don't know, there may have been some people warning, but I don't recall it. So I think when you see people warning about something like AI, having got social media wrong, failing to understand what it would bring with it, when we hear the warnings about AI, I think it's important to heed them.
Malcolm, with many students in the room going to graduate within the next few years, move into the workforce and take up leadership opportunities in those jobs, I wanted to pose to you, what advice would you give about leading with integrity and influence?
Well, integrity and influence. I think integrity is absolutely critical. If you want to build trust, you've got to do at least two things. You've got to tell the truth and you've got to be transparent about it. So I've got 3 T's. Truth, transparency, delivers trust. It's absolutely critical. There is far too much lying going on in public life and people are getting away with it. I mean, look, can I tell you, when I was Prime Minister, if you're the PM, you're the one person that can get asked any question. So if you're the Minister for Communications, you go to a press conference and someone says, you know, what about, you know, some issue, some economic issue. You say, oh, thank you for the question. You really should be addressing that to my friend, the Treasurer, you know, or Minister for Finance or something like that. If you're the PM, they'll ask you questions about anything. And I was always terrified I would get a fact wrong, you know. I certainly wasn't out there telling lies. I wouldn't do that. But I was worried I'd just make a mistake, and then, you know, then you'd get into trouble with that. Nowadays, because of the pace of the news cycle, and I mentioned this, Trump's the classic example. By the time people have worked out, hey, what he said yesterday wasn't true, they've moved on to something else. So truth really matters. If you want to be trusted, you've got to be truthful. And the risk is that if we get into an environment where nobody is trusting, then they are likely to believe anything. You know, they can be told anything. So, you know, truthfulness and transparency are critical. You can't just say, I'm telling you the truth and that's it, and you've got to take my word for it. You've got to be able to say, you've got to provide the footnotes, in other words. In fact, as Lucy knows, I used my political speeches, I would have a lot of footnotes in them. Now, you don't read the footnotes in a speech, let alone a political speech, but they were there for my benefit so that if someone said, what about that? I could go, aha, you know, this is why I've said that, this is where I got that number from. So I think that's very important. In terms of influence, if you want to be influential, again, you've got to be able to inspire trust. You've got to be able to inspire respect. You win respect by respecting others, in my view. And, you know, clearly you've got to be a good communicator. There are a lot of other things, but they are, you know, they are the essential mechanical things, you know, advocacy, communication skills, all of that is important. But the foundation is integrity. That's what it's about, because without integrity, you will not build trust, in my view. Others may differ.
Great. Thank you, Malcolm. One more question, a quick one just to finish up our night, comes from Hannah Campbell, second-year Bachelor of Design student at the University of Melbourne. She poses to you, if you were Prime Minister again for one day and tasked with choosing Australia's national food, what would it be and why?
Well, it would probably be the only thing that I can reliably cook, which would have to be pasta with passata. But that's, I mean, I was, just to explain that, I can do a few other things, but I'm a simple, as Luce would say, I'm not a bad cook, but I have a very limited repertoire, which speaks to someone who sort of lived, you know, with his dad, a single father, for quite a few years. And so, you know, two men living together, you can imagine there wasn't a broad range of cuisine. But nonetheless, the handful of things we could cook, we could do. And that I can reliably do. But that, you don't want me, you know, having me determining your culinary, you know, resources would be a very bad move. I'm more on the consumption than the production side.
That's great. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, give a big round of applause for the
Good. That's right. Thank you. Good. Thank you. I'll sit down, yeah? Okay.
Alrighty. Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Kelly, and on behalf of the Newman Students Club, the Daniel Mannix Lecture Committee, it is my greatest pleasure to stand here before you to formally close this evening's event. I would like to begin by expressing our deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for your attendance here tonight. Your engagement and interest are what make these occasions so meaningful. We express our sincere thanks to the dedicated staff and administration of Newman College, whose support has been invaluable in bringing tonight's lecture to life. We are also deeply grateful to our wonderful volunteers who gave their time to help prepare this space for all of us. Your efforts have not gone unnoticed, and we thank you. Our deepest appreciation is reserved for our distinguished guests, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull and Lucy Turnbull. We cannot thank you enough for giving us your valuable time and expertise. Your presentation was not only thoroughly engaging, but also profoundly thought-provoking. We are deeply grateful for your generosity in sharing your insights tonight. As a small token of our immense gratitude, we would like to present you with two gifts that we hope will serve you as a lasting memento of your visit to Newman. The first is a beautiful watercolour painting Apologies. The first is a beautiful watercolour painting of our Newman grounds, a serene watercolour of the Mannix wing, lovingly painted by the talented artist Hugh Cushing. He has masterfully captured the unique light and the character of the beautiful trees that grace our historic quadrangle, a peaceful corner of our campus we are proud to share with you. The second gift is a set of 3 beautifully carved emu eggs, which were purchased through the remarkable Torch Project. This non-profit organisation runs a program for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander prisoners to allow them to paint and create artistically in prison and in the community. They help individuals reconnect with their culture, develop profound artistic skills, and generate income through the sale of their art. These particular eggs were carved by an artist named William, a Gunditjmara man from the Gippsland region. The designs are deeply symbolic, featuring 2 wrens who are known as messengers and a pelican, a key character of leadership from Gunai Kunai dreaming. In closing, please join me in one final warm round of applause to thank Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull for a truly memorable evening. Mr. and Mrs. Turnbull will depart with the Provost, Dean of Studies and the Lecture Committee, but we cordially invite all guests of the lecture to supper at Newman College, where we will continue with great discussion on the points from Mr. Turnbull's talk. Please follow the large crowd of students back to our dining hall for coffee, biscuits and desserts. Thank you and safe travels.